One of the keys, I think, to playing the piano is really the ability to strike the keys with different pressure. It's all about balancing. So it's one of the differences between the piano and a harpsichord, or a piano and an organ. So that when you play a chord, you don't play every single note with the same intensity. So what happens if you're out of balance is, I'll give you an example, the melody itself will be drowned out. So in this piece, those are all the right notes, but because the left hand is too loud, you don't really hear the melody. So you adjust and have to listen. And basically, every pianist who plays at some level deals with that, even if they're not aware of it.
I've heard that some keys are easier to play in. On an electric guitar or bass or something, every key is pretty much the same. You just move your hand over a fret.
Well, actually, the sort of the lay of the land, the real estate on the piano is perfectly suited to the human hand. It's really designed just right. If your fingers are relaxed and they're resting on the keys, your three fingers in the middle rest very comfortably on the three black notes. And so, some composers, specifically I'm thinking of Chopin, said the easiest key to play in, I think he said, was F sharp, which has 6 sharps. And the hardest was C major, which has no black notes in the key signature. And it's because to play in C, because you can't stretch your fingers out comfortably like this, they have to be more curled like this. It's more unnatural. But I think ultimately it's a personal thing. There's lots of easy pieces.
And what about playing with other people? I know you and I used to play duets every week.
Well, there's a lot of music written for piano and other instruments and singing. Piano, because you can do more than one thing at a time. You could play the melody and the harmony and the bass line simultaneously. It's an ideal accompaniment for another instrument. I think a lot of chamber music used to be written for people to play at home before internet and television. It was a huge, something that brought people together. It was easier if you could afford to bring a whole chamber orchestra to your house. You could do that. But for most people, the piano was perfect for that. A lot of people actually met their spouses playing piano duets. The most famous one I know of is Grieg met his wife playing piano.
And you also teach. How do you feel about metronomes?
Oh, I use the metronome for everything. Music really is sort of painted on time. And one of the things that any musician needs to develop is the ability to measure time. Doesn't mean you should play metronomically, but teaching students how to measure time is actually very complicated. It's abstract. It's not something you can just take out a ruler and measure and say this is the length of a beat. You have to sort of internalize it and sort of be able to measure it internally and keep track of it. It takes a long time to do that.
And it takes practice, obviously, and confidence to not rush, which is a common problem.
Everybody rushes, especially when they're performing, because that's when you get nervous, and the first thing to go out the window is timing.
A big part of interpretation seems to be the small timing changes within the overall tempo. I've heard musicians do really big retards, even though there's nothing necessarily written down, and that must be a part of the art of interpretation, I assume.
Definitely that changing the tempo. Well, the tempo itself is a fundamental part of interpreting. That's the first decision almost you have to make. How fast are you going to play the piece? And then within each phrase, you can say this should go a little bit faster, a little bit slower. If you do too much of that, it could be extremely out of style. But again, it goes back to, the measuring of time is the key, and to do it stylistically and to do it artfully is one of the key things. It's almost impossible to teach it. It's something that you have to really develop over time. When you first start to play the piano, the balancing comes in with this hand versus this hand. In the more complicated piece, it becomes this side of your hand versus this side of your hand. Or in the very hard ones, in terms of balancing, it'll be to bring out the notes that you play with the middle part of your hand, and the outer ones are softer.
That takes years and years and years, I'm sure.
Yes.
Do you practice currently?
Oh, yes.
How often do you practice?
Well, I probably play every day. Depending on the season, I'll practice an hour or two on the piano and an hour or two on the organ.
So we have Terry Flynn and Steve Isaacson here, and we're going to talk about the mechanics of pianos. And Terry's a piano technician and tuner and expert. And we have his beautiful Steinway Grand here.
The right-hand pedal is the one that's used predominantly in piano music. It's called the sustain pedal usually.
Yeah, I have a question about the left pedal, which shifts the hammers to the right.
Correct.
But this part of the piano, where there's only one string per key, the hammer still hits the string.
Yes.
And I was wondering how that softens the sound and what it does when there's two or three strings.
The soft pedal is kind of the common term for it, and it's appropriate because it does make the piano sound softer. It's one term that's used a lot is una corda, but that's not strictly true because that means one string. But actually, it's not hitting one string when you shift it.
But it's not only that it makes the volume softer, but it makes the tone softer, which is something that you couldn't necessarily do just by playing softer.
Correct. And that's how it's used artistically. All serious pianists use it not to make it softer, but to give a different timbre. The shift pedal has the effect of changing the part of the hammer that's hitting the string. So this is normal position, and this is shift.
Ah, yes.
The key to voicing a piano in shift position is not to clear the strings, but to hit a different part of the hammer. And I can demonstrate this way. Imagine this is the hammer, and these are the three strings. The strings harden the part of the hammer which is being struck most of the time in normal position. If you shift, now, even though it's still hitting three strings, it's hitting them in this part of the hammer that isn't usually struck.
Right, because it wears kind of grooves and it hardens from just over and over and over.
That's the first reason why this would be softer. The second reason why this would be softer, and this is one of the more sophisticated techniques in concert voicing, is that I actually needle that part of the hammer differently. Once the piano's regulated, I have the hammer coming up and hitting three strings. Once I've got that exactly where I want it, I put ink under the strings. I use carbon paper, stick it under there. The hammers put ink under the strings, and then I pull the carbon paper away. And then the hammer strikes, and I see three dark lines on the hammer. I know that's where the strings are striking in normal position. These grooves here. I'll leave that good and firm, and then I will needle deeply the points between the strings. And I'm actually not picking, I'm just going in and softening it a bit. And I'll do it so that when the hammer shifts, you get a distinctly softer tone, and it has to be even. So all three strings should sound the same when you shift, and there are no funny harmonics. And that is the ideal.
And you do that for each hammer?
Every hammer, every string.
How long does that take you to do?
It's a process that actually takes several days, because it has to be played in, settled in. I can do the first pass in half a day. If you have to, it depends how much time you have, but typically I'll take a week to regulate and voice a piano, sometimes 2 weeks.
All right, so Terry is going to take this piano apart and show us how the mechanism works.
you take off what's called the key slip. It just removes 2 big fat screws. So I've just taken out the 2 screws. This all comes off, and this is the big trick in piano technique is keeping these on because they fall up very easily. New, these are over $100,000.
Wow.
When we rebuild these, my main subcontractor, Clavier House, praise them. They sell these for about $85,000, the restored ones, in their showroom in Manhattan. We have one, which we sell them typically directly to someone who just comes to us, for a lot less. But
Oh, that's awesome.
so there it is. That's all it took. The key component of a piano, without making too many puns, obviously it's a keyboard instrument. The key invention was to get a hammer instead of a little quill plucking a string, as in the harpsichord, or a metal tangent, as in the clavichord, that just hits a string and stays there. The key invention for the piano was to get a felt or leather hammer to come swinging up, hit the string, and then bounce back. And the thing that made that possible is called the escapement mechanism. You can probably see the bottom of all this, which is the key. It's like a little seesaw. It's a piece of wood that extends from here all the way to here. So this long piece of wood is rocking on this fulcrum. And then in the middle is this contraption that's called the wippen. And I'm going to actually pull this out for you. And this little bit, this complex little bit in here, is what holds the key to the pianoforte. Because you can see that this mechanism transmits the energy from the key to the hammer, which is just a long stick with a little thing on the end on a pivot. So the trick is to get the force to press up against this knuckle and then to slip off so the hammer can come back. This piece here allows the force to be transmitted through this thing that's sticking up. It's called the jack. So that force goes up, hits the hammer, and then it pulls away. And it goes up. Now watch, at this moment, here's the moment of escapement. You see that? This pushed out of the way.
Right.
That is absolutely crucial. That's the core of it. You press, and the hammer and the jack kicks out of the way so the hammer can fall back.